Good morning. My name is Zhang. I'm from the Department of English, and I'm the facilitator for the group. And I am joined by my co-presenter, Catherine Brist, also from the English department. Our project brings together four strands: a terrain map of human AI co-creative relations developed by Embryon, a postdoc fellow from Ross Business School, and me, and a literature review with a speculative fiction archive by Catherine and Kelly, and Kelly's from musicology. And we also have a case study of AI use in dance, led by Kiana and Tim. They're from Dance and Performance. And finally, we have a bit of research on AI, social media, and everyday creativity by Sam from Design Science and E from Environment and Sustainability. Our title, A Multimodal Analysis of Human AI Co-Creativity in Contemporary Cultural Production, Taxonomy, Theory, Praxis. It's a mouthful, but the density reflects the problem we encountered when we first approached the topic. We realized early on that we were looking at a really messy field, from writing assistants, image generators, AI music, choreographic systems, to social media content co-created with AI. One question kept returning for us: when something is described as human AI co-creative, what kind of relationship is actually being named? Public discourse often treats AI and creativity as stable, self-evident categories, but our project complicates both. We've learned not to equate AI with big corporate models. There are also artist-trained systems and smaller assistive interfaces. We've also learned that creativity is historically variable, internally differentiated, and the subject of a well-established research field. Beyond the sheer diversity of human AI co-creative practices, we found that the same phrase AI-assisted creativity or AI creativity can conceal very different structures of authorship when it comes to an AI persona on TikTok, a designer generating photos in Midjourney, a text-to-image platform, or a creative writer drafting with Gemini. As we discovered that these various practices entail different distributions of agency and labor, we shifted our framing early on. Instead of asking the ontological question of whether AI is creative in the abstract, we asked what sort of co-creative relation is being constructed in each case. Our method was multimodal, exploratory, predominantly qualitative, with a hybrid structure that reflects the mixed nature of the phenomenon itself. We approached human AI co-creativity from four angles, and you can find details about each in our four posters this afternoon. Our terrain map subgroup curated a preliminary typology from 26 cases across creative media and platform contexts, ranging from GPT's image creation function to music generation platforms like Suno, to features like Grammarly's writing in the voice of famous authors. The literature review gives us some cultural and theoretical pressure points. We drew on work in creativity studies and debates on authorship, alongside research in human-computer interaction and algorithmic transparency. Much of the scholarship offers strong local accounts of issues of copyright, user control, or platform governance, but not much on distinguishing human-AI co-creative relations across media forms. That gap pushed us toward a vocabulary of process for how and where AI enters workflow and how human users negotiate and exercise their agency. Catherine and Kelly's strand on speculative fiction studied cultural imaginaries of creative AI by writers such as Kurt Vonnegut and Ken Liu. It asks, before we ever engage AI in creative practices, what narratives have already shaped how we desire, fear, or anthropomorphize it in relation to our human selves? Our third group treats dance as a stress test. Across case studies of artists such as Diego Marin and Rashad Newsom, and of Tim and Kiana's own dance practices, AI functions less as an autonomous choreographer than as a system for mediation and translation that offers dramaturgical and pedagogical support. What remains distinctly human turns out to be what makes dance meaningful in the first place: the embodied interpretation and the lived responsiveness of the human body. Our last strand returns to everyday creativity. E studies AI's role in more personal forms of co-creation, such as vision boards and travel blogs, and Sam returns us to the platform environments that shape user experience before we even begin to create content. His independent project titled Reclaiming the Scroll conceptualizes how AI itself might help users intervene more intentionally in algorithmically curated media environments.
Thanks, Asa. I'm going to talk through some of our findings. So our first finding is that AI creativity is too blunt a category to be particularly useful. Our terrain map identified 7 recurring human-AI relations. These relations behave more like phases in a workflow than like stationary categories. For example, a researcher might use something like Notebook LM to synthesize their sources, or ChatGPT to reshape parts of an argument before making their own final interpretive choices. Likewise, a dancer might use AI for lighting ideas or dramaturgical research, while the kinesthetic narrative itself is still composed by the dancer in the studio. So for all of these reasons, how much AI was used is often the wrong question, because a small AI intervention at a decisive stage can often matter more than a large amount of automation at a peripheral stage. Our second finding concerns reception. Based on the admittedly small sample from our group members, positive responses to AI clustered when human agency was legible, whereas suspicion increased when the human-AI relations became opaque. So for instance, when influencers pose as quasi-persons or when stock imagery is produced without clear disclosures. And this pattern suggests that people respond not only to the quality of AI output, but also to the perceived structure of authorship behind it. And our study of speculative fiction helps explain why these reactions can feel so charged. In some familiar science fiction pieces, such as WALL-E, Blade Runner, and Her, creativity offers evidence of an interior life, rendering machines lovable and almost human. Elsewhere, in works by science fiction writers such as Adrian Tchaikovsky's work Silicon Hearts, creative AI leads to automated cultural factories where human artists are reduced to the dispensable role of quality control workers. So speculative fiction, in other words, gives us a vocabulary for the emotional politics of AI. That of empathy, identification, and also the suspicion that creativity might become industrializable. And Tim and Kiana's work on dance tests the limits of this logic. From motion capture to movement interaction to Newsom's AI system trained on Black feminist and abolitionist materials, all of which they elaborate on in their poster. AI assists dancers in meaningful ways, but the authorship itself remains anchored in bodily practice. So a concise version of our finding would be, so far, AI changes the conditions under which creative work is produced more often than it replaces people who make art, with or without a capital A. And AI increasingly shapes the meaning and parameter of creative work, amplifying our intentions and sometimes surprising us with unexpected variations. But the value and meaning of creative work still fundamentally depends on human judgment and embodied knowledge. So for these reasons, our project resists a simple pro-AI or anti-AI narrative. And our mapping, of course, does not exhaust the many ethical questions at stake here. But depending on data sources and system design, AI assistance can be quite generative in one setting and can be deceptive in another. So for example, voice cloning tools like 11 Labs can be artistically powerful, but problematic if they lack consent or transparency around their training corpus. On the other hand, American musician Holly Herndon, in a different setting, has trained an AI music system as part of her own practice, and she treats AI-generated voice as something to be shaped and answered for, not simply taken without consent. Distinctions such as these helped us separate AI contribution from AI authorship. In many cases that we studied, AI shapes artists' workflows substantially, but the shaping process is not the same as carrying responsibility and stakes in the way that human authorship typically implies. The promotional language we often hear about AI sells it as frictionless creativity, but our research suggests actually almost the opposite. It suggests that better and responsible uses of AI often require more and more explicit and more intentional human steering, not less. So with all of this in mind, for graduate education, we believe that a more nuanced vocabulary is needed rather than asking yes AI or no AI. Instead, we would ask, where does human control enter the process of production? What labor was delegated to AI models? What types of revision occurred? What aspects of the work still depend on cultural, disciplinary, and experiential knowledge that cannot be automated? Critical AI literacy, therefore, means more than knowing how to use AI tools. It requires the ability to scrutinize human-AI relationships in specific workflows, including how we delegate labor, attribute authorship, and the ethical implications of those choices. We also set aside the verdict on whether AI is creative, a question that's not particularly useful in this context, and we instead offer a more practical finding. Human-AI co-creativity unfolds across a spectrum of relations, each distributing agency and accountability in ways we are only beginning to study. And if graduate education is to respond thoughtfully to AI, the conversation should begin with the structure of those relations rather than the apparent magic of output alone. Thank you.